In the dim silence of forgotten villages, where old rites still echo through temple smoke, and shadows stretch longer than they should, welcome to Whispers of Asia, where every story is a doorway, and every doorway may lead somewhere you should never have entered. Tonight we speak of a coin, not of gold, not of greed, but of passage. A single disc of metal, placed beneath the tongue of the dead, meant to guide them across the unseen river. But what happens when that coin is taken? When hunger speaks louder than tradition, and debt is paid in blood, not silver. This is a tale soaked in grief, bound by ritual, and whispered through gaping mouths that never truly closed. You are about to hear The Funeral Coin, a story from the edges of rural Thailand, where spirits do not rest, they wait, and they count the days. Are you listening closely?
It began with silence, not the gentle kind that wraps a village in sleep, but the kind that chokes birds mid-flight, that makes dogs cower and monks pause mid-chant. In the dusty heart of a rural Thai village, the kind that didn't exist on most maps, the wind stopped blowing the day Kiet died. He was 9 years old, small, curious, soft-spoken. A boy who collected beels in glass jars and watched the moon like it might one day speak to him. No one knew how he died. One morning he simply did not wake. His mother found him curled peacefully on the woven mat, mouth slightly open, a smear of dried blood beneath his nose, and eyes glassy with something that hadn't quite left. The elders said his spirit had been taken before its time, that something had pulled him back before the proper rites could anchor him. His family, numbed by grief, turned to tradition, the only thing they could still hold. They prepared the boy's body beneath the Bodhi tree, washed him with lotus water, draped him in white robes stitched with red threads. His mother wept until her throat dried. His father did not speak at all. And when it was time, the most sacred part of the rite, the coin was brought forth. It was old, worn thin by decades of thumbprints and tears, passed down from ancestor to ancestor. Not for wealth, not for luck, but for passage. A coin to place under the tongue of the dead, to pay the guardians at the crossing, to ensure the soul's journey into the next life was smooth, unburdened, complete. The village elder, a withered man with more wrinkles than teeth, whispered an ancient chant as he placed the coin under Kiet's tongue. Let the boy pass clean. Let the mouth close in peace. Let the debt not follow. And yet, as they closed Kiet's mouth, something strange happened. His lips wouldn't quite shut. They trembled slightly, as if something inside still wished to speak. A crow cawed overhead, then another. Soon a dozen gathered on the roof of the temple, watching. When they tried to light the funeral pyre, the flames sputtered, then died. They tried again and again, but the fire refused. One monk muttered that the boy did not want to leave. Another whispered a darker thought, that someone had called him back. So they changed the rite, buried him instead, in a shaded corner of the temple grounds, near a tree that leaned like it too was listening, the coin still beneath his tongue. That night, the village dogs howled. The monks reported hearing soft footsteps in the main hall. Kiet's mother woke screaming, swearing she had seen her son standing at the foot of her bed, dripping water from his hair though it had not rained in days. But no one spoke of these things aloud, because in places like this, places where belief runs thicker than blood, speaking is how you make spirits real. And so they stayed silent, all except one, a woman named Molly. She lived at the edge of the village in a crumbling hut barely fit for animals. Her husband had died 3 winters ago, and her young son, thin as a reed, had eaten nothing but rice water for 2 days. Molly had not wept at Kiet's funeral, not because she lacked sorrow, but because grief was a luxury she could no longer afford. She had watched the burial from the shadows, noticed the coin, noted where they placed him. And that night, when the dogs howled and the monks prayed, Molly crept through the dark, shovel in hand. She told herself it was only a coin, metal, dead weight in a dead boy's mouth. He would not miss it. But in the quiet of the grave, with dirt sticking to her knees and her breath fogging the cold night air, she hesitated. The grave was shallow. The villagers had buried him quickly, fearing the rot of lingering spirits. She dug fast. Her hands shook. Her body ached. And then, there he was, Kiet. His face still soft, eyes closed, mouth slightly open. She reached into his mouth. The coin was warm. Molly did not question it. She wrapped it in cloth, whispered an apology, and buried him again. No one saw her return. No one but the tree, which now leaned a little closer to the grave, like it too was listening. The next morning, Molly bought food, a full meal for her son, boiled rice, dried fish, even a sliver of banana. He ate with tears in his eyes, thanked her again and again. She smiled, though her hands would not stop shaking. That night as they slept, her son stirred, then coughed, then gagged. She lit a candle. His lips were bleeding. A single word slipped from his cracked lips, barely a whisper. Coin. Outside, the crows gathered once more, and somewhere beneath the earth, a boy's mouth moved. Molly had always known that hunger was louder than fear. It howled louder than warnings, louder than curses, louder even than the voice of her own conscience. And now it whispered from her walls, from her son's trembling mouth, from the shadows under her door. The coin she had stolen burned in her thoughts. It had bought food, yes. It had silenced her child's cries of hunger, yes. But it had also awakened something. Something that now moved when the wind didn't. Something that whispered even when the house was still. That night, her son, Deck, did not sleep. He lay on the mat, eyes wide and wet, clutching the small rag doll his father had sewn from rice sacks before he died. His little hands were cold, his lips cracked, and his voice, once high and sweet, was now hoarse, barely a breath. May, Mama, there's someone outside. Molly held him close, whispering lullabies that no longer worked. Outside, there were no footsteps, no tapping, no creaks of old wood. But there were whispers, low, childlike, repeating numbers in a tongue far older than the village. She lit incense and prayed, not the long chants of the temple, but the broken, begging kind. Her voice cracked, her knees bruised the bamboo floor, and still the whispers did not stop. Deck began drawing again. He had always loved to draw in the dirt, sticks, beetles, stars. But now he drew mouths, rows and rows of mouths, open and black, bleeding at the corners. Some had teeth, some had coins, some had no tongues. When Molly asked him why, he looked up with tired eyes and said, "It doesn't want me to forget his face." And then he showed her a picture of a boy with blank eyes and a coin where his mouth should be.
She slapped the drawing from his hands and instantly regretted it. Deck did not cry. He simply stared at her, silent, like he was listening to something far away. That night, Molly dreamed of water, a dark river, its surface thick and unmoving, like oil. She was standing on the edge, barefoot, holding a coin in her mouth. Across the river, she saw Hiet, pale, wet, and waiting. His hands were tied with red string. His mouth was open. A whisper came from it, not spoken but felt. "You took what was mine, so now I take until it's even." She woke gasping. The coin, hidden in a tin box beneath the floorboards, was gone. Deck was sitting by the door. His mouth was moving silently. She rushed to him, but stopped when she saw his tongue. It had turned gray. By morning, the village was already grieving another. The abbot of the temple, a man who had tended the funeral pyre, who had tried 3 times to light the fire beneath Kiet, was found dead in the courtyard. His face was calm, his hands rested in prayer, but his mouth was open wide, unnaturally so, as if something had broken it from the inside. And inside his throat, choking the airway, was a single, dull coin, worn, ancient, familiar. The same coin that had once rested beneath Kiet's tongue. The villagers gasped. Some prayed, some wept. Others began muttering ancient phrases, prayers not taught in temples, but passed down in secret, words for protection, words for binding. Molly said nothing. She could not speak. Her tongue felt heavy. Her ears rang with echoes of whispers she could no longer locate. She carried Deck to the healer, but the old woman would not open her door. Through the slats, she said, "The boy has been marked. He has something that was meant for the dead." She begged her to explain. Instead, the woman told her a story. Long ago, she said, before the Buddha's time, before temples and scrolls, the people of the land believed that death was not the end, but a toll. Souls crossed rivers of ash and bone, and guardians stood on either side. They demanded payment, not in gold, but in balance. If a spirit was buried without its debt paid, it would wander, and if its offering was stolen, it would come back and it would collect. The ritual was called Gao Quan, the separation of body and spirit, and the coin was never meant to buy peace for the dead. It was a delay, a payment for time, to keep the dead from pulling the living down with them. And now Molly had taken it. She had stolen time, and time does not forget. That night the whispers changed. They grew sharper, more precise, more rhythmic. One word repeated again and again. 7. Molly didn't sleep. She watched over her son as he tossed and moaned. At exactly midnight, the air in her hut grew cold. The flame of the candle flickered, then froze, unmoving, upright as if caught in a photograph. And then she saw him. Hiet, standing in the corner of the room, bare feet muddy, white funeral robes soaked through, lips dark, tongue missing, and blood dripping from where the coin had once rested. His eyes rolled toward her, not turning, rolling, like something inside him was trying to find a way out. And he whispered, not with voice, with breath, with rot, 7. Molly screamed. When she blinked, he was gone, but a coin sat on the floor where he had stood. She picked it up, hands trembling. It was warm again, warmer than flesh, and it smelled not of metal, but of smoke and salt water. In the morning, the healer was gone. Her hut stood open, her bed was still warm, but her mouth was found nailed shut with coins, one for each day since Kiet's burial. The villagers met under the banyan tree. They whispered about curses, about broken rites, about sins too old to name. They said it was the Gao Quan, that someone had violated it, and the ghost, the Fi Quan, was now demanding balance. Molly did not confess. Who would believe her? Who would protect her? She had no husband, no family, no worth, only her son, and he was slipping further each day. That night, he spoke only in numbers. 6, 5, 4. He scratched them into the dirt with his fingernail until his skin bled. Molly prayed louder. The whispers rose with her voice, drowning her words. And beneath the floorboards, something began to move. Not a rat, not wind, but the sound of fingers tapping. Mouths that still whispered, that never closed. Mouths that bled. And Molly knew this was only the beginning. The debt was not paid, and time was running out.
The sun refused to rise properly the next morning. It climbed the sky, yes, but without warmth, casting a pale, colorless light over the village as though shining through smoke. Shadows stretched where they shouldn't. Roosters crowed late and stopped suddenly, mid-call, like they too sensed something was off. And the air tasted wrong, metallic, like blood left too long in the open. Molly didn't sleep. She hadn't truly slept in days. She sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, staring at the single coin resting in her palm. It had returned again, warm as always, damp with something that smelled like river mud and old breath. Deck lay curled beside her, murmuring softly in his dreams. His fingers twitched, his lips were chapped and bruised, dried blood crusted in the corners of his mouth. She wiped it away with trembling hands. He did not wake, and the whispers had stopped. But silence, she was learning, was worse. Silence meant waiting. Silence meant the spirit was watching. Word of the healer's disappearance spread quickly, but no one dared investigate further. In villages like this, people knew better to dig too deep into dark things. The temple gates were shut that day. Monks kept their heads bowed low. Chants were softer. Incense burned faster. One novice claimed he saw coins dripping from the mouths of statues. The elders dismissed him. But everyone began to lock their doors before dark. Everyone, except Molly. She had nothing to lock. No windows, no real walls, just woven bamboo and prayer. And a boy who no longer spoke. That night, it happened. It began with the wind, or rather, the sudden absence of it. The leaves froze mid-sway. The air grew still, pressed down like a lid. Then, a breath. Molly heard it before she saw anything. A sharp inhale, wet and ragged, like someone breathing through broken lungs. She turned toward the door and saw the crack widen on its own. And there, standing just beyond the threshold, was Kiet. But this time, he did not appear as a child. He had changed. His limbs were too long. His joints bent the wrong way. His funeral robes hung like wet skin from bones that no longer knew how to hold themselves. And his face, dear God, his face was stretched in agony. His mouth, gone. Just a dark, gaping cavity, rimmed in torn flesh, bleeding continuously, as if the coin had been ripped from it again and again.
but still from the void of that mouth came a sound. 3. It wasn't spoken. It arrived in the room, in the body, in the marrow of Molly's bones. A word felt beneath the ribs. Then came the footsteps. Not his. Behind him. Multiple. Uneven. Wet. And then something dragged, as if a body, or many, were being pulled through the dirt by unseen hands. She couldn't breathe. She reached for her son, pulled him into her arms, but Deck did not stir. His eyes were open, but glassy, as if he was dreaming while awake. She whispered prayers into his ear, old ones, forbidden ones, words her grandmother had once warned her never to use. But the air grew thick, the walls groaned, and then blood. It seeped from the corners of the hut, not dripping, pouring, from the seams in the floor, from the thatch roof above. Thick, blackened blood, with a smell like rotting copper and burnt feathers. She screamed. Deck convulsed in her arms. And then just as suddenly, it stopped. Everything vanished. The blood, the breath, the boy. Gone. Only the candle remained, flickering violently, as if gasping. And on the mat beside them lay another coin. But this one was different. This one was new, bright, untouched, etched with a symbol Molly had never seen before. A mouth bound shut with string. She dropped it. It sizzled on the floor. At dawn, the village awoke to another body. The youngest monk, a teenager barely 17, was found slumped at the temple altar, hands folded in silent prayer. But his mouth had been forced open, his jaw dislocated, and inside, packed so tightly they could barely remove them, were 3 coins. Not just any coins. They bore the faces of the dead. The abbot, the healer, and a third no one recognized, until someone remembered the name. Kiet's grandmother, dead 10 years, buried with honor. Her grave was exhumed that afternoon. Inside, her body was missing its tongue. Panic bloomed like rot. The elders convened, arguing until sunset. Some said the ghost was angry. Others said it was hungry. But the oldest among them, an ancient woman named May Suda, blind and bedridden for years, gave the real answer. She whispered it to her daughter, who told the village, "This is not a ghost. This is a debt collector." She explained what few remembered, that in the old times, the Gao Huan was not just a ritual, it was a contract, a spiritual agreement, a coin offered for safe passage, but also to delay retribution. If the dead felt wronged and the coin was touched, moved, or stolen, the contract unraveled, and the spirit would begin to collect. Not all at once, one by one, until the balance was restored, or until someone offered themselves in full payment. Molly listened from the back of the gathering. She wanted to scream, to confess, to beg for help, but shame pinned her down, and fear stitched her lips shut. Because now, it wasn't just about the coin. It was about her son. Deck had stopped speaking completely. He no longer reacted to sunlight, to food, to her voice. He sat quietly, always listening, always drawing. And now, not just mouths, he drew faces, people from the village, their mouths bleeding, their eyes rolled back, coins jammed deep into their throats, and next to each one, a number, counting down. That night, Molly did not wait. She took the coin. She carried it in both hands, wrapped in cloth soaked with her tears, and she returned to the grave. Kiet's grave. The dirt was soft, as if it had been stirred recently. She knelt, dug, wept. "I'm sorry," she whispered, again and again. "Take it back. Take the coin. Leave us alone." But when she reached the coffin and opened it, it was empty. Not just of Kiet, but of everything. No bones, no cloth, no trace. Only a single scrap of paper, curled and damp, sitting in the bottom. A child's drawing. A house, a coin, a mother, a boy, and above them, in red, 2.
The grave remained open. Molly stood at its edge until the candle in her hand burned out, leaving only smoke and trembling breath. Beneath her feet, the earth no longer felt solid. It pulsed as if breathing, as if watching. The coffin had been empty. The boy was no longer there. And now the coin, the one she had returned, had turned to ash in her hand the moment she laid it inside. There was no taking it back, because it had never been hers to take. She carried the child's drawing back to her hut, stiff with damp, the red ink bleeding across the thin paper. A simple house, 2 stick figures, one tall, one small. And behind them, looming like a tree with no leaves, was a third figure, thin, bent, all mouth. No eyes, no arms, just a bleeding mouth. Above it, the word 2, scratched in a child's hand. Deck's hand. He had drawn it, but when Molly asked him about it, he didn't respond. He just looked at her, through her, past her, and then whispered, "One more sleep, Mama." She froze. "What happens after that?" she asked. His eyes flicked toward the roof. Then it's someone else's turn. The next morning, the village bell did not ring. It always rang at dawn, a hollow bronze clang that called the monks to their first prayers and signaled the living that the dead had stayed away one more night. But on this morning, there was only silence. And then screams. The blacksmith's wife was dead, found in her kitchen, sitting upright, her face calm, but her neck stiff, her mouth wide open and stuffed with rice. Her husband said she woke in the night, hungry, craving rice, craving coins. She had eaten without stopping until she choked and died. In her lap was a silver bowl filled with old coins, coins not from this village, each marked with the same image, a mouth sewn shut with red string. The villagers gathered again. This time there was no denial, no blaming wind, no talking of accidents. This was a curse, and it was spreading. They formed a circle beneath the sacred tree, the one whose roots were said to grow through the bones of the first monk who ever blessed the village. And they called for the old man. They called for Grandfather Inn. No one had seen him in years. He lived in a crumbling shack up on the ridge where the air was thin and the sky too close.
Some said he had gone mad. Others whispered he was a ritualist, a man who once spoke with the dead before the temples forbade it. But now, with mouths bleeding and coins appearing in cradles, they had no choice but to beg for forbidden knowledge. He came at dusk, bent, thin, bones like walking sticks, wrapped in ochre cloth too sacred for a madman to wear. But when he entered the circle, the birds stopped singing, and even the insects grew quiet. His eyes, one blind, the other a clouded yellow, swept over the villagers. He listened, and when they finished, he said only this: "This is not a haunting. This is an inheritance." The crowd murmured. The Gaoquan was broken. A soul passed without payment. A path was stolen. And now the debt falls not just on the thief, but on the village as a whole. They asked him what to do, how to stop it, how to send the spirit back. Grandfather Inn smiled without joy. You cannot send back a spirit that no longer walks on the path. He's not in the river anymore. He's in the mouth of the living. He paused. You will know the final night when the counting ends. On that night, you must offer a trade. A life. He shook his head. No, a willing life. One who accepts the debt. One who gives their body and their mouth in place of the boy. A vessel. A keeper of the coin. Mali heard every word and knew. She was the one who had broken the ritual. She was the one who must pay it. But she was a mother, and mothers do not hand themselves over to death when their child is still bleeding. They fight, even if the ghosts have already won. That night, Deck spoke again. For the first time in days. He's closer now. Where is he? Molly whispered. Everywhere. What does he want? Deck turned to her slowly. To stop counting. Then he opened his mouth, and Molly screamed. Because inside her child's mouth, on the roof of his tongue, were tiny coins, embedded, glinting like teeth. And one by one they began to fall out, clinking on the floor like silver rain. 7 of them, one for each night since the burial. Mali swept them into a cloth, tied them tightly, and ran. She did not know where to go, only that the coins needed to be away from her child. She ran to the river, to the same one they had once crossed with Kiat's body before deciding to bury him instead. The river was now black, still, smelling of sulfur and copper. She waded in waist deep and tossed the coins into the current. They sank fast, too fast. But the water did not move. No ripples, no splash. And then she heard breathing beneath the water, like lungs struggling to inhale, but never quite managing. She backed away, but something brushed her foot. She ran home soaked and shaking, but when she opened her door, the coins were waiting on her bed, dry and warm. The numbers continued, carved now into her walls, into the dirt outside, into her child's skin. 1 appeared on his wrist, thin and red like a burn. She tried to wash it off. It returned. She tried to burn the coins. They screamed. She tried to bury them. The earth spat them out. And each time another name appeared in Deck's drawings. Another villager. Another open mouth. Another countdown. Then the wind changed. Not a breeze, but a sudden gust of rot, sweeping through the village like a wave. And the bell rang, not by human hand, but on its own. Once, twice, 13 times, then silence, and on the 14th, a whisper, all across the village, simultaneous, beneath floorboards, behind walls, inside children's toys, in old women's ears, the same word, over and over. Tomorrow.
The village did not sleep that night. No doors creaked, no dogs barked, no roosters crowed. Only the wind moved, but not through the trees. It slid beneath houses, between sleeping mats, through the cracks in floorboards and the gaps in teeth. A ghost wind, heavy with breath. It carried the scent of old metal, temple smoke, and something sour, like dried blood left too long in a monk's bowl. At midnight, every mirror in the village fogged from the inside, and when they cleared, every reflection was smiling, except their mouths weren't moving. Molly sat beside her son, who now whispered in his sleep. He called out names: Uncle Somchai, Grandmother Ree, Sister Molly. Then the numbers, backwards, from 10 to 1. Then silence, then a final word: debt. By dawn, the rice fields had withered. The monks refused to open the temple gates, and at the village center someone had placed an offering bowl, filled not with fruit or incense, but with tongues, small, shriveled, human. Some still twitched. The elders were broken now, no longer arguing, no longer pretending. They stood silent in the square as the old man, Grandfather In, spoke one final truth. You thought the coin was for safe passage. It never was. He pointed at Molly. Tell them. She did not deny it. She stood slowly, barefoot on the cracked earth, and confessed in a whisper how she had stolen the coin from Keats' mouth, how she had used it to feed her son, how she had tried to give it back, how the grave was empty, how the coin would not leave her. She expected them to scream, to cast her out, to curse her. But no one spoke, because they all knew now, this was no longer about her. The spirit had moved past blame. Now it was collecting. Grandfather In lifted a bundle wrapped in red cloth. From it he drew a scroll, long, frayed, painted in ink so old it looked like dried blood. The villagers gasped. It was a Tom Nom Con, a forbidden ritual, a calling back, a tethering of soul to flesh, banned by temples, punished by law, but old, older than Buddha, older than kings, and still remembered. The old man unrolled the scroll with shaking hands and read, When the spirit has no tongue, when the path has no coin, when the debt has no weight, then one must give voice to the silence. A tongue, a mouth, a willing vessel. Someone must take the spirit in, bind it, carry it, not forever, just until the next death, until the next coin. The ritual, Grandfather In explained, required 3 offerings: a tooth from the dead, a drop of blood from the thief, and a tongue given freely, torn from a living mouth. Only then could the spirit be fed, bound, and stilled, not exorcised,
never destroyed, only delayed, like the coin once did. The villagers refused. No one offered, not a tooth, not blood, not anything. Because deep down they believed one thing: Molly had caused this. So Molly left the square in silence, her son clutched to her chest. She no longer asked for help. She no longer hoped for mercy. She would save him herself or die with him. That night she waited, and the ghost came. Keat, but not as before. He was whole now, beautiful, dressed in white. A coin sat perfectly on his tongue, but his mouth never moved. Instead, the air around him spoke. The hut filled with voices, hundreds layered together, children, elders, mothers, men, all whispering the same thing. Give him a mouth, give him words, give him shape, give him rest, give him you. The coin floated from his lips, hovering in the air before Molly. Deck whimpered in her arms. The coin moved toward him. Molly stood between her son and the ghost, and she opened her mouth. Take me, let it be me. I stole it, I give it back. But the ghost did not vanish. Instead, it split. Keat's body cracked, like pottery splitting down the center, and from inside, more mouths emerged. Mouths with no faces, mouths that hung in the air, all open, all bleeding, and all whispering. Debt is not erased, debt is only transferred. Who carries the coin must carry the curse. Molly woke in a circle of blood. Her hands were torn. Her tongue tasted of copper. Deck was beside her, still alive, still silent, and in his hand was a tooth, a child's, small, pale, cracked, and beside it, her own blood. She had bitten her tongue in her sleep. The two offerings gathered. Only one remained. She went to Grandfather Inn at dawn, alone. She showed him the tooth, the blood, and then opened her mouth. Take it. I'm ready. The old man wept, not for her, but because he had seen this before. Once, long ago, a woman, a coin, a curse. He took her hand. You will lose more than your voice. I already have, she said. They performed the ritual in secret. No villagers came, only Molly, Grandfather Inn, and Deck, bound in red thread, asleep beside a bowl of rice. The tongue was cut clean. Molly screamed once and then was silent forever. The blood was poured over the scroll, the tooth placed beneath it, the coin set aflame. And from the smoke, Keat came one last time, smiling, and for the first time, he closed his mouth. The silence was absolute, not peaceful, not gentle, but hollow, like the inside of a sealed clay jar, echoing only breath and memory. Molly could no longer speak. The ritual had taken her tongue, her voice, her final scream. And yet, when she awoke the next morning beneath the Bodhi tree, she was alive, bleeding, weak but alive. She opened her eyes to morning mist curling low over the fields, to the smell of incense that hadn't been burned, to a stillness that made the skin tighten across her bones. Beside her, Dek stirred. He looked healthier now. Color had returned to his cheeks. His lips were no longer bruised, his eyes no longer glassy. He looked at his mother and smiled. "You stopped him," he said softly. Molly reached for him with trembling hands, and he leaned into her arms. But something in his expression paused her. Because Dek was smiling, yes, but behind that smile was something missing. Grandfather In found them as the sun reached its peak. He said nothing as he knelt and checked Molly's bandaged mouth. He offered her water, rice, and a single nod of respect. Then he lit a stick of incense and pressed it into the dirt. "The boy is still quiet," he murmured, not looking at either of them. "But the wind has changed. The dead have stepped back, for now." He did not say peace had returned, because peace is not what curses leave behind, only pause. The village began to move again. The temple reopened its gates. Monks walked barefoot through the streets once more, collecting alms in silence. The blacksmith's forge hissed with new fire. Babies cried, dogs barked, chickens scratched. But beneath it all, a new fear whispered. Because the bodies were still being found, not fresh, not recent, but old. Graves dug up, bones disturbed, and in the mouths of every unearthed skull, a coin. Not the sacred coin of passage, but crude, handmade discs shaped from tin, clay, or even bone, all etched with the same image, a mouth torn open, a tongue missing. Molly walked the village with her head down and her child's hand in hers. People did not speak to her. Some bowed, some crossed themselves, some turned away. She was not cursed anymore. She was something worse. She was a vessel, a body that had made a deal with the spirit world, a woman without a tongue. And in this village, that meant something had been accepted in exchange, something still waiting. That night, Dek drew again. He had stopped during the haunting, too weak, too afraid. But now he sat in the candlelight, quietly sketching with charcoal on old rice sacks. Molly watched from the corner of the hut, holding a warm cloth to her mouth, unable to ask what he was making. She didn't have to. He turned the drawing toward her and smiled. "It's you," he said, "and him." The image was crude but clear. A woman kneeling, a boy behind them, and standing before them, tall and thin and faceless, was a third figure, its arms long, its chest hollow, its mouth stitched shut. No longer bleeding, just sealed. In the corner of the page, Dek had drawn something else, a bowl, and inside it, a pile of tongues. Later that week, it began again. Not the hauntings, but the offerings. Villagers started waking to strange gifts at their doors, small bundles wrapped in banana leaves. Inside, coins, not valuable ones, crude, carved with string, soaked in blood, warm to the touch. And along with them, symbols written in red. Some were names, some were numbers, some were mouths. The elders declared it a warning. Grandfather In called it a binding. He whispered, "The spirit has not left. It has moved inward, into the bones, into the breath of those who watched and did nothing." One morning, the rice fields bloomed red. not flowers, but tongues, thin and pale, growing like mushrooms from the mud. The farmers refused to harvest that season. Too many found their harvest bowls already filled with coins before they touched a grain. At night, fires burned cleaner than before, but the shadows moved slower, as if watching, as if waiting for instructions. Then came the child, a girl named Nari, 6 years old, found wandering near the graveyard with a coin in each palm and her mouth sewn shut, not by thread, but by flesh. The skin had grown over her lips like wax poured and hardened. She was alive, but would not speak again, not even cry. The village went still, until Grandfather Inn summoned the council. "It is spreading," he said, "but not like before, not with death, not with blood. This is the second part of the Gao Quan." "What part?" someone asked. He unrolled a smaller scroll, one few had ever seen. "The curse does not end when the coin is returned. It only changes, from spirit to ritual, from possession to memory, from fear to obedience." He explained, "In the forgotten chapters of the rite, once the debt was accepted by a living tongue, the spirit entered the mouths of the village, not to kill, but to watch, to listen, to ensure the pact was never broken again. Each coin left at a door was not a threat, but a reminder. Each tongue removed or silenced was a mark of obedience. And the girl? She had not been attacked, she had been chosen. The villagers began to change. They spoke less, they prayed more. Children were taught to hold coins under their tongues when they slept. Mothers stitched tiny mouth charms and hung them above cradles. Offerings were made daily, not to Buddha, but to the coin. A new shrine was built near the old grave. No name, no statue, just an open bowl, and inside it, tongues. Dozens, some old, some fresh, all willingly given. Molly brought one too, not her own. She had nothing left to offer. But she placed a dried lotus petal from her tongue ritual, stained with blood, into the bowl. And for the first time since the haunting began, the wind did not enter her hut that night. Deck slept without whispering. The mirrors stayed clear. The rice bowls remained untouched. But Molly knew it was not over. It had simply become normal. The curse had woven itself into daily life, not as punishment, but as ritual. A debt paid in silence, a lesson etched in the flesh of children. And beneath the house, buried where no roots grew, the coin still pulsed. Not gone, not cold, just waiting for the day someone forgot and touched it again.
The wind returned on the 7th night. Not the soft rustle of bamboo leaves or the whistle of passing monsoon drafts, but a heavier current, a wind that came from within walls, through the cracks in family shrines, and up from beneath the floors. It carried with it the scent of burnt rice, old bone ash, and wet, unfinished firewood. And with it came the whisper, "Feed us." Mali had heard the term before, the Feast of Shadows. It was a name never spoken in daylight, only passed in hushed stories around charcoal fires, told by elders with trembling lips and half-forgotten prayers clutched in their fists. A ritual from the time before temples, a rite to appease spirits not yet ancestors, spirits that lingered, spirits that fed, not on food, but on grief, on guilt, on silence. And now the village prepared it, because the coins were multiplying. It started slowly, one here, one there, left on doorsteps, placed in shoes, appearing inside bamboo steamers. But now they were everywhere. In water jars, in babies' mouths, in the bowls of monks. One mother found a coin inside her breast milk. One man coughed up 2 while asleep. And one child, barely 4, whispered through cracked lips, "If we don't feed them, they'll feed on us." Grandfather Inn summoned the elders. Even he looked thinner now, older, like the coin had begun carving pieces of him from the inside. "We must give them what they want," he said, voice weak. "We must host the feast." The villagers agreed, because fear, when stretched long enough, begins to resemble faith, and faith can justify anything. Preparations began the next morning, not with joy, not with music, but with ash. Women scrubbed floors with river mud. Men wove shadow drapes from black banana leaves to hang over doors. Children ground bones of animals, and some whispered, not only animals, into powder to mix into the feast. No one asked why. They only obeyed, because to refuse the ritual was to invite the ghost, and everyone remembered the mouths. The altar was raised near the old graveyard. No names, no statues, no chants. Just a flat stone table carved with 13 open mouths around the edge, each dripping downward into a black clay bowl beneath. It was said that if the bowls remained empty by sunrise, the spirits would fill them themselves, with tongues, with blood, with children. Mali watched from afar. She had not been asked to help, not because they didn't need her, but because they feared her. She was the one who had taken, the one who had offered, the one who had spoken with the dead. Now she simply walked the edge of the ritual, her child in tow, her voice forever gone, but her presence undeniable, and the spirits knew her. They watched through cracked mirrors and cold water and flickering flames, and whispered through the mouths of sleeping elders. She began the hunger. She must end the feast. That night, the offerings were laid out. Not food, not in the usual sense, but pieces, hair, nails, ash, teeth, blood, even a jar of tears collected from the grieving mothers of the past year. The villagers stood in silence as Grandfather Inn poured black rice into each mouth-shaped bowl. Then he lit the single candle at the center, a wax pillar carved in the shape of a gaping face. No one spoke, but the wind began to howl, not outside, inside, inside mouths, inside huts, inside the hollow of the altar. And then it arrived. The ghost. Not Kiet anymore. No longer child-shaped or even human, but tall, stretched, a shadow with too many joints, and a face that shifted with every blink. Sometimes it was a boy, sometimes an old man, sometimes a mother, sometimes Mali. And behind it, the mouthless followed. Dozens, bleeding, tongueless, whispering through the holes where speech had once lived. They surrounded the altar, waiting, watching, and as the candle burned low, the bowls began to fill, not with the offerings, but with something black, thick, pulsing, hungry. Then a child screamed. Nari, the girl whose mouth had grown closed. She pointed at Mali, and in a voice that should not have been possible, said, "She has not finished her offering."
gasps. Eyes turned. Mali stepped back. She had nothing left to give. No tongue, no voice, no coin. But still the crowd parted. The altar waited, and the ghost smiled, wide, endless. Dek stepped forward. He held something in his hands, a small wooden box tied with red thread. He opened it. Inside, a coin. But not the old one, not cursed. This one was new, carved from wood, painted gold, etched by a child's hand. Dek placed it in the final bowl, and the wind stopped. The ghost paused, tilted its head, and then bowed, not to the village, to Dek. The shadows pulled back, the mouthless receded, the wind breathed out, and the bowls stayed full. But they no longer dripped, they no longer bled. They simply glowed, faintly, as if satisfied, as if for now the hunger was quiet. The villagers exhaled for the first time in weeks. No one celebrated, no one smiled, but the curse had shifted again, from haunting to ritual to bargain. And Mali realized what had just happened. Her son had done what she could not. He had given something new, not payment, not flesh, but acknowledgement, a symbol, a coin made by hand, by a child. And the ghost, that ancient formless mouth, had accepted. Later, Grandfather In approached her. He looked tired, more spirit than man now. "Your child understands them," he whispered. "They're watching him. He may not be cursed, but he is now bound." Mali nodded slowly, and for the first time since her voice was taken, she cried. That night the villagers dreamed the same dream. A house, a coin, a mother, a boy, and far in the distance, a table with empty bowls, and mouths opening slowly, waiting, always waiting.
The coins stopped coming. No more bundles on doorsteps. No more clinking beneath pillows. No more copper rising in the mouths of sleeping children. But peace, when it finally arrived, felt wrong. Too quiet. Too light. As though something had been removed, but not replaced. As though a presence had stepped aside, but not away. The villagers spoke in softer tones. Prayers were still offered, but now to both gods and ghosts, side by side. And in the fields where rice once withered, grew strong again. Still, no one dared say it out loud. No one said the word, gone, because something about the boy still lingered. Mali knew it before anyone else. Dek was different now. Not ill, not possessed, but distant. He no longer played, no longer laughed. He spent his days walking the edge of the graveyard, drawing symbols in the dirt, small, tight circles with lines that bent inwards like spiral mouths. When she called for him, he came, but slowly, as if distracted by something only he could hear. When she looked in his eyes, she saw nothing wrong, and that terrified her, because it meant the wrongness was deeper than eyes could reach. She took him to the temple. The monks welcomed her this time. They no longer saw a curse, only a woman who had carried it. Grandfather In had passed quietly in his sleep, his hands folded around a final coin. It was carved with a lotus, the first peaceful symbol seen in weeks. The new abbot, young and uncertain, placed the coin at the foot of the statue of Buddha, then burned incense in Dek's name. But the smoke rose sideways, and when it touched Deck's skin, he didn't flinch. He simply whispered, "He's still here." The monk leaned in. "Who is?" Deck looked toward the empty yard behind the temple, where the shadows were deepest. "The boy. He didn't pass on." That night, Molly lit a lantern and sat with her son. She couldn't speak, but her eyes asked what her voice could not. Deck answered anyway. "He doesn't hate us," he said quietly. "He doesn't want revenge. He's just waiting." She wrote on a scrap of cloth, "For what?" Deck took a long time to respond. Finally, he whispered, "Permission." Molly didn't sleep. She watched the moon rise. She watched the candle burn low. She watched the place where Kiet had once stood, near the door, near the broken mat, near the ashes that still clung to the corners of the hut. And sometime near dawn, she saw movement. Not shadow, not breeze, but a boy, standing quietly, staring at nothing. His face was calm now. No more bleeding, no torn mouth, no coin. Just Kiet as he had once been. Still, watching, waiting. Molly wrapped Deck in cloth and left before sunrise. She traveled to the edge of the forest, to where the trees grew too close and the birds no longer sang, to where her grandmother once lived, long dead, but remembered. Her grandmother had been a May Mod Kwan, a spirit mother, a keeper of ancestral rites before temples took their place. Molly had never visited the old shrine, but now her feet knew where to go. They found the path between vines. They found the altar made of stone and bone. They found the place where memory waited. There, beneath the banyan roots, she knelt. Deck stood beside her. The wind turned cold. The candles she lit blew sideways. The air thickened, and something arrived. Not Kiet, not the mouthless, but older, deeper. A presence without form, heavy as stone, familiar as blood. Deck whispered, "They're watching." Molly opened the old scrolls, faded, molded, inked in blood. And there, tucked between two pages, was the ritual no one taught anymore, the Kwan return. A rite not for burial, not for banishment, but for permission. A ritual to send the soul home. It required three things: the original mouth, or its remains, the coin used to delay the journey, and a living soul to give consent on behalf of the dead. Molly had one, the consent. Deck had another. He reached into his satchel and pulled out the wooden coin, the one he had carved during the Feast of Shadows. But the mouth, they had burned the body, buried the ashes, and the earth had swallowed the rest, until Deck said he kept a piece. He reached into a shirt and pulled out a tooth, Kiet's tooth. He had found it in the dirt days ago, where the grave had once been, had kept it close without telling anyone, because he knew. The ritual was spoken in silence, carved in gestures, written in ash. Molly and Deck lit candles in the shape of a path, not straight, but winding, like a spirit finding its way. They placed the tooth in the center, laid the coin on top. Deck knelt, pressed his forehead to the ground, and whispered, "You may go now." The wind stopped, the flame tilted, and from the roots of the banyan a sound emerged. Not breath, not voice, but a sigh, so deep, so old, it shook the dirt. The coin cracked, the tooth turned black, and somewhere far away a bell rang, though no temple had pulled it. That night Molly dreamed of water, a wide river lit by stars. Kiet stood at the edge, still small, still barefoot, but no longer pale, no longer waiting. A boat approached, carved from bone and reed. He stepped inside. He did not look back, and as the river carried him away, his mouth moved once more. Only once, a single word. Free. Molly woke to birdsong, real birdsong, not the silence that had filled the village for weeks, not the morning calls of crows, but morning, bright, ordinary, alive. Deck slept peacefully, and for the first time in days, smiled in his sleep. She sat beside him, holding the cracked coin. It no longer pulsed, it no longer burned. It was just wood. The villagers reported no coins that day, no shadows, no whispers. The altar bowls had dried, and the shrine was left untouched. Only the old grave remained, empty, silent, at peace. But in a quiet corner of Molly's hut, beneath the woven floor, a small stone remained, carved by a child's hand. It bore no name, only a symbol, a coin and a mouth, closed. Peace does not last in places where the dead have learned how to speak. Weeks passed. The rice returned. The trees bore fruit again. The monks resumed their chanting, and laughter, cautious, brittle laughter, slowly crept back into the village like vines reclaiming a wall. But something was missing. Not a person, not a ghost. A sound, a sensation, like a breath you'd forgotten how to take. The villagers did not speak of it, but they felt it. At night, some still locked their mouths with thread. Children still whispered prayers into water before they drank, and no one touched a coin without first bowing to it. Because though the boy had been released, the ritual had remained. Molly knew it first. She could feel it in the air, that strange stillness before something changes. She had learned to read the signs, the sudden silence of birds, the way oil wouldn't bubble over flame, the way shadows no longer clung to objects but moved with them. Deke had grown quiet again, not afraid but distant. He no longer spoke of Kiet, but he had begun carving things from wood. Not toys, not coins, mouths, open mouths, small, flat, hollowed shapes strung on red thread and hung from the rafters. He called them watchers. Molly couldn't ask why, not with words, but in her silence he always seemed to understand. They keep the hunger away, he said. They like mouths now, even empty ones. Then came the first dream, not Molly's, not Deke's, but the entire village. One night, every living soul closed their eyes and found themselves in the same place, a clearing, a table, 13 bowls as before, but this time there was no food, no coins, no ash, only teeth. Each bowl filled with small white teeth, baby teeth, sharpened teeth, teeth stained black. And in the center of the table sat a boy, mouth wide open, empty, waiting. Every dream ended the same way. Fill it, or it will feed itself. When the village awoke, 3 people were missing: a woman, a child, an elder. They were found just before sunrise, sitting in a perfect circle beneath the Bodhi tree, back straight, eyes open, mouths gone. Not shown shut, not cut, gone, as if they had never existed, just smooth skin where lips and teeth had once been. In their hands, each held a tiny coin, carved from bone. The next night, the dreams returned, and so did the whisper, "Fill it." The elders called for counsel.
The monks refused to speak. Even the new abbot wept when asked for guidance. The last rites had failed. The coin had been burned, the debt paid. So what was this? Why had the curse changed shape? Molly already knew. She had seen the patterns, the slow spiral of hauntings, the hunger that needed order, the spirit that once screamed, now asking politely. It no longer wanted revenge. It wanted ritual, a structure, a routine. It wanted to become law. That night, Deke performed his own ceremony. He laid 13 wooden mouths in a circle, lit 13 candles, and placed rice grains inside each one. Then he sat in the middle and whispered, "Here is your meal. Here is your silence." When Molly tried to stop him, he shook his head. "They won't hurt me," he said. "I've been listening. They just want to be remembered." And then he drew in the dirt a symbol Molly had never seen before. A spiral, a mouth at the center, hands reaching in, and at the very core, an eye, watching. The next morning, the villagers awoke to find their own mouths drawn in charcoal on their doors. Each door different, some open, some closed, some missing entirely. A sign, a warning, or perhaps an invitation. The new curse had begun, but this time it was not carried by a ghost, it was carried by people, through ritual, through belief, through obedience. Deke gathered the children. He taught them the symbols. He gave them wooden mouths to wear around their necks. He showed them how to sit in circles and chant without words. He told them in soft tones, "If the mouth is empty, the spirit has no place to stay. But if the mouth is full, with voice, with truth, with grief, it can rest." One girl asked what happened if they stopped the ritual. Deke looked down at the dirt and whispered, "Then it will return, but not as a boy, but as a need." Molly watched her son lead them. She did not interfere. She knew somehow he had inherited something, not from her, not from the villagers, but from the space between this world and the next. He was not possessed, he was chosen, not by the dead, but by the ritual itself. The force that had once demanded blood and silence now wanted something more structured, and her son was its new mouthpiece. That night, the dreams shifted again. No more hunger, no more bowls, just a single image. A faceless figure, mouth sewn shut, hands outstretched, holding a scroll. And written upon it, in blood, in thread, in ash, the empty mouth ritual. By the end of the week, every house had built a shrine. Each contained one bowl of dry rice, one coin, one empty mask shaped like an open mouth, one symbol drawn in chalk on the wall behind it. No one commanded it, no one enforced it, and yet everyone obeyed, because somehow, deep down, they knew. It was no longer about ghosts, no longer about death. It was about memory, about keeping something quiet that should never be loud again. And beneath it all, beneath every floorboard, beneath the earth where Kiat once lay, a low hum began to rise. Not frightening, not angry, but steady, like breathing, like waiting. Because rituals once formed do not die. They grow, they replicate, they pass from generation to generation, until no one remembers where they came from, only that they are necessary.
It began again, not with a scream, but with a silence. Not the oppressive silence of dread, nor the reverent quiet of prayer, but an absence, a small, sharp, hollow stillness, the kind that lives in the pit of a stomach, in the space between breath and hunger. It arrived inside Deck. He stopped eating. First rice, then fruit, then soup. He drank only water, and even that, slowly, as if swallowing was difficult. Malene noticed immediately. He didn't complain of pain, he didn't act ill, but he looked hungry. Not in his body, but in his eyes. That glint she'd seen before, when the haunting first began, had returned. Not fear, not possession, but something deeper. A pulling, like his soul was being drawn toward something he couldn't name. She offered him everything: warm rice balls, sticky mango, fish grilled with salt, his favorite. He would smile, he would touch her hand, and then say, "Not yet." When she wrote the question, "Why?" he answered quietly, "Because I'm already full. Something's eating for me." The villagers had noticed too. Their children began mimicking Deck's rituals, sitting in circles with wooden mouths, chanting without words, placing rice in bowls and leaving them at the crossroads. It wasn't out of fear anymore. It was habit, routine, like brushing one's teeth, like tying one's shoes, like giving offerings to a hunger they couldn't see, but somehow recognized. The rituals had become the rhythm of the village. Even the monks had stopped their sunrise bells. Instead, they lit silent candles shaped like open mouths. And at night, no one spoke after dusk. Words, they feared, might awaken the need again. Malene grew desperate. She carried her son to the healer, but the woman had stopped giving medicine. Now she only gave instructions. "He's not sick," she whispered. "He's chosen. The hunger is inside him now, not to consume him, but to rest in him. But even rest requires feeding." Malene wrote furiously, "How do I feed something that doesn't eat?" The healer's eyes lowered. "You give it memory." So Malene began the old songs, the ones her grandmother had sung when the fields were bare. Songs not for joy, but for survival. She sang them voiceless through gesture and rhythm, slapping cloth, tapping bowls, clicking stones. Deck listened, watched, but still would not eat. She wrote him stories in the dirt, tales of old spirits, wandering rivers, of dogs who became men, and coins that spoke only lies. He smiled, but still he would not eat, because something else was. Then came the animals. A dog disappeared, then 2 chickens, then a calf found days later near the edge of the forest, bones clean, eyes missing, no blood, no struggle, only a coin beside its ribcage, made of wood, carved with a mouth. Malene began waking in the night to the sound of chewing, not outside, inside the house, inside the walls, inside her dreams. Deck began speaking less, but when he did, the words felt older than him. "He's still here," he murmured one night. "Not the boy, the one before him, the first hunger, the one no one fed. So now he eats through me." Malene clutched him.
But he only looked out the door, eyes glassy, stomach still. One day she found him sitting before the altar, the one they built for Kiat, now a shrine without name. He was drawing in the dirt, a figure, tall, thin, no face, and a bowl overflowing, not with food, but with mouths, stacked, open, gasping. That night, Dek stopped drinking water. His skin dried, his lips cracked. But he didn't look pained. He looked quiet. He touched Molly's arm and said gently, "He needs one last meal. Then he'll go back to sleep." She shook her head. She wrote, "What does he want?" Dek answered without hesitation, a willing voice to say goodbye, a mouth that opens not from fear, but from love. And Molly knew what he meant. She lit the last candle, prepared the rice bowl, and placed the cracked wooden coin beside it. And then she knelt, her hands shaking, her jaw still aching from the ritual long past. She pressed her lips to Dek's forehead and opened her mouth, though it hurt to do so, though no words came out. She opened it and let the wind move through, let the breath escape, let the grief go. A whisper, formed not in sound, but in presence. He may eat now. The house grew cold, the shadows lengthened, and for one breathless moment, Molly saw the tall figure again, standing behind her son. No face, no voice, no hunger. Just a presence, a pause, and then it faded. The rice bowl stayed full. The candle burned steady. Dek opened his eyes and said, "I'm hungry." She cooked everything, all of it. Pots boiled, fires roared, the smell of garlic and ginger and salt filled the air. And Dek ate and ate and laughed. The villagers watched, in awe, in fear, in relief. The boy was eating. The hunger had passed, but not vanished, just sated. For now. The shrine was left standing. The wooden coin remained, and every home kept its own rice bowl, just in case. Not out of fear, but out of respect, because now they understood. It wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about ghosts. It was about remembrance and feeding what memory leaves behind.
14 nights since the boy first stopped eating. 14 nights since the ghost quieted. 14 nights of breath held under moonlight, of candles burned low, of villagers sleeping with their backs against the walls, and their mouths slightly open, just enough, they said, to let the spirits pass through without resistance. No one had died. No one had vanished. The bowls stayed full. The coins stayed warm, but no longer pulsed. And yet, the silence felt tighter, like something was drawing a circle around the village, something final. On the 14th evening, Molly dreamed again. But this time, it was not a river, not a shrine, not a mouth. It was a house, wooden, old, the same shape as her own. Inside, 13 chairs. 12 were filled. Men, women, children, silent, eyes closed. All held coins in their hands.
all bore stitched lines across their throats, and the 13th chair, empty, waiting. Facing it was a mirror, and in the reflection, Molly herself, mouth bleeding, eyes wide, whispering something she could not hear, but could feel. One more. She woke before dawn, drenched in cold sweat. Deck sat by the door, drawing, not dirt this time, but wood. He carved a tiny face, open-mouthed, hollow-eyed, and placed it beside the others. Molly watched him. He said nothing, just pushed it toward her and said, "Tonight's the last one." She wrote quickly, "The last what?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for the coin, the original coin, cracked and dark, still kept in a red cloth. He placed it in her palm and whispered, "The debt ends after the 14th whisper, or it starts again." The village awoke to find red thread wrapped around every doorframe, not tied by hands, woven in perfect loops, mouth-sized. Shrine candles refused to light. All water tasted like salt. And in the temple, the statue of Buddha had turned, ever so slightly, to face the west, where the graves lay, where Kiet had once been buried, where the ritual had begun. At sunset, the wind returned, sharp, sudden, wet with rot. It moved low, crawling along the earth like a snake of breath. No one dared speak. They simply gathered in the square, as if summoned by something none of them understood. And Deck stepped into the center, clutching a wooden bowl. He looked smaller now, not sick, but dimmed, as if a candle burned behind his eyes and the wax had started to run low. He looked up at the sky, which had gone red, not from sun, but from smoke, and he whispered, 14 mouths, 14 nights, 14 debts. It ends tonight." The air thickened, the shadows bent, and they arrived. Not ghosts, echoes. The mouthless returned, not as spirits, but as impressions. Silhouettes carved in smoke and memory, moving between villagers, whispering without lips. Not words, numbers, counted backward. 14, 13, 12. Each villager heard a different number. Molly heard 11. And then the altar cracked. The one built of stone, beneath the Bodhi tree. It split down the middle with a sound like teeth breaking, and from within rose him, not Kiet, not the shadow boy, something older, taller, wrapped in centuries of silence, a figure made of mouths, layered, stacked, twisting, some weeping, some gasping, one laughing, and in the center of its chest a gaping cavity stitched with red thread. It looked at Molly, and she understood. This was not vengeance. This was collection, and the last whisper was hers. Deck turned to her, tears in his eyes. "He won't take me," he said. "I've already spoken too much. He wants the one who stole the coin, the one who started the hunger. He wants a mouth that remembers." Molly stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, no fear. She had carried this weight since the night she dug up the grave. She had fed it, nurtured it, paid it in blood, in silence, in ritual. Now she would close it. She removed the cloth from her throat, revealing the scar where her tongue had once been. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a bowl. Inside, the broken coin. She held it up, and the spirit leaned forward, its 100 mouths exhaling in unison. Molly opened her mouth. No sound came out, but inside her, deep, deep inside, she gave it the memory of grief, of guilt, of a starving child, of a coin in the dark, of a boy's mouth that never closed, of debt carried too long. She didn't speak it, she offered it, and the spirit ate, not with jaws, but with silence. When the wind returned, it was warm. When the shadow faded, the altar stood whole again. And when Molly opened her eyes, the villagers were crying, not out of fear, but release. The air smelled of smoke and rain. The coins on every door had turned to dust. The threads had vanished, and Deck was sleeping in her arms, smiling. That night, the villagers dreamed a final time. They saw a path, lit by lanterns, lined with bowls, each bowl empty, clean, no coins, no blood, only rice, soft, steaming, enough for everyone. And above the path, a single mouth, closed, peacefully, finally.
The village did not wake with joy. They woke with quiet. Not the quiet of fear or the hush of ritual, but the sacred kind. The kind that comes after the final bell has rung, after the last bowl has been filled, after the hunger has gone back into the earth and the mouth has finally closed. The 14th whisper had passed, but something remained, something unfinished. Molly knew it before she opened her eyes. The ritual was not done, not fully. Yes, the spirit had faded. Yes, the coins had turned to dust. Yes, the people had begun to speak again, slowly, carefully, like learning how to use their voices for the first time. But beneath it all, something still stirred. A knot, a thread left untied, and it was wrapped around her. Deck slept soundly now, peacefully. No more carvings, no more whispered numbers in his sleep. But Molly no longer dreamed. Her nights were blank, a still void where once there were rivers, altars, mouths. Her body moved through the days like it remembered how to be alive, but inside she felt hollowed out, like the boy hadn't just taken her tongue, he'd taken something deeper and left something behind. On the third morning after the final whisper, the statue at the temple cracked. Just one. A child-sized figure tucked beside the main altar. No one had touched it in years, and yet across its mouth a single fracture. Thin, deliberate. It hadn't broken, it had opened. Inside the crack, a piece of parchment, old, rot-stained, written in a language most had forgotten. But Molly remembered. It was the tongue of her grandmother, the language of the May Maud Kwan, the midwives between the living and the dead. She took the scroll home and unrolled it, and there, written in shaky red strokes, were the final words of a rite long forbidden. When the debt ends, but the mouth remains open,
Offer the soul a body. Let it taste the world one last time. Let it remember love. Let it forget grief. Then seal it with silence. The ritual required no coin, no blood, only flesh. A voice, offered freely one final time, and then a return. Molly sat beneath the Bodhi tree and watched Deck play for the first time in weeks. He laughed. He stumbled. He ran in circles with a stick pretending it was a sword. And when he fell, he looked up at her and grinned, a gap where one tooth had come loose. "I think I'm normal again," he said. She smiled. She did not correct him. He was more than normal now. He was whole, because she had paid the price. But the ritual required one final seal. That night, Molly prepared a space in the center of their hut. Not an altar, not a grave, but a cradle. She laid soft cloth across the floor, lit 4 candles, one for grief, one for hunger, one for silence, one for memory. And then she sat cross-legged with the scroll in her lap and opened her mouth. No voice came out, only breath. And breath, the elders once said, is the oldest language. She spoke with her hands, with her tears, with her chest, heaving, trembling, steady. Deck stood at the door. He did not speak, but he watched. He understood. He always had. And then the air changed. Not cold, not hostile, but present, thick, a familiar weight. And from the far corner of the hut, a figure stepped forward, small, thin, barefoot. Keat, but not the ghost boy from before. This one was smiling, clean, whole. He looked at Deck, then at Molly, and then down, at the floor, at the cradle of cloth. He stepped into it, curled his legs beneath him, folded his hands, and closed his eyes. Molly exhaled long and slow and pressed her forehead to the earth. The scroll burned on its own. Flames rose without heat. The candles dimmed, and a single whisper filled the room. "Thank you. I remember now. I can rest." When the smoke cleared, the cradle was empty. The air smelled of wet earth and lotus. Deck slept soundly, and Molly, though her voice never returned, felt whole for the first time since the coin had been stolen, because she had not just returned the debt, she had fed the spirit one final thing, a place to belong, a body, a goodbye, a mother's love. And with that, the mouth had finally closed. The next day, the villagers gathered. They built no shrine, no stone, no statue, just a single bowl placed under the Bodhi tree, filled with clear water. Anyone could drink. No offerings needed, just memory, just silence. And they began to speak again. Softly at first, then louder. Laughter returned. Names were said without fear. Children sang. Coins were used again for buying, not binding. The world resumed, but not as it was, as it had become, marked, quiet, stronger. Molly never spoke again. But she didn't need to. People listened when she gestured. They understood her eyes. They gave her space in every circle, a seat in every council, because she had walked between worlds and brought back something sacred. She had shown them that the dead don't need vengeance, they need closure, and sometimes that closure is shaped like a tongue. That night, beneath the moonlight, Deck drew one final picture in the dirt. A house, a mother, a boy, a ghost, smiling, and above them, a mouth, closed, silent, but content.
No story ends where it should. It simply folds back into itself, in whispers, in dreams, in things found when no one was looking. Weeks passed. Molly's hut became a place of calm. Visitors came not to gawk, but to leave things: flowers, rice, cloth figures with stitched mouths. Deck ran again, laughed again, ate without hesitation. The villagers called it healing. They called it peace. But the wise ones, the ones who never fully slept at night, called it something else. A calm between mouths. It started with a dog, old, limping, blind in one eye. It dug at the edge of the temple graveyard, a place no one had touched since the last ritual. The villagers heard its barking, then its silence. When they arrived, they found the dog dead, not torn, not poisoned, just still. And beside it, unearthed from a shallow pit, a small, rotten bundle, wrapped in cloth, dark with time and damp. Inside, bones, tiny, childlike, and resting beneath the ribs, a coin, not wooden, not new, old, blackened, cold. The original, the coin from Kiet's tongue, the coin Molly had buried, returned. Word spread fast. Molly was the last to arrive. She stared down on the coin resting on the earth as if it had never left. She didn't cry. She didn't move. She simply stepped back and wrote on the ground beside her, "Why now?" No one answered, but the wind did. It turned suddenly, blew ash from the temple incense across the grave, and when the smoke cleared, the bones were gone, vanished. Only the coin remained, and it was warm. That night, Molly dreamed of her son, but not the way he was, the way he had once been, sickly, pale, eyes heavy with whispers. In the dream, he held the coin in both hands. He looked afraid. I didn't take it, but it came back anyway. It remembers. Then the dream shifted. The hut was empty, and on the floor, a coin in every bowl, a coin in every mouth, a coin in her hand. She awoke breathless. Deck slept soundly, but at the foot of his bed, something small, something round, glinted in the candlelight. She approached, carefully. It was not a coin, not exactly. It was a button from an old shirt, polished smooth, but someone had carved into it a mouth, open, smiling, and on the back, etched in jagged lines, 1. The next morning, the village well turned black, not poisoned, not dirty, still.
as if the water beneath had stopped moving. Buckets came up full, but undrinkable. Each one carried a coin, different sizes, different metals, all carved with mouths, some laughing, some sewn shut, some screaming. The elders gathered once more. They argued, but quietly, because deep down they already knew the debt had returned, but not as hunger, not as death, as memory. That afternoon, a man brought news from a village across the river. Strange things, he said. Children waking with coins beneath their tongues, pigs refusing to eat, dogs barking at empty chairs, a mother who began singing in a voice not her own. They called it fever, they called it madness, but the man carried proof, a bag of coins, wooden, bone, copper, all carved with a symbol they now knew too well, a mouth, a circle, a thread. The coin was traveling. Dek no longer smiled. He spent hours near the shrine, not praying, not speaking, just sitting. Molly wrote to him, "Do you feel him again?" He nodded. But it's not him anymore. It's something else. He left, but the coin didn't. And now it's looking for a home. The monks tried to destroy it. Fire, hammer, water, prayer. Each time the coin returned. In someone's food, in the firewood, in the bell. Always warm, always waiting. Molly gathered the villagers beneath the Bodhi tree. She stood where she once knelt years ago. She held the coin high. No words, but her silence was enough. Dek translated for her. It never needed vengeance. It never wanted suffering. It only ever wanted one thing: a witness. So they built a shrine, not for worship, but for remembrance. Not of the boy, of the act. A glass box, a stone base, and inside it, not the coin, which vanished the moment they tried to display it, but a single bowl, empty, mouth-shaped, waiting. They called it the Shrine of the Unpaid. Every villager, once a year, would sit before it in silence. Place something small in the bowl, a memory, a tear, a word, and then walk away. No prayers, no offerings, only the acknowledgement that some debts never fully disappear. They echo, they return, like coins buried too shallow, like grief passed through generations. One morning a traveler came, a woman, old, foreign. She asked about the shrine. Molly watched her. She touched the bowl and said, "We had one like this far from here. Different story, same silence. The coin always returns, but now at least we know how to listen." That night, Molly sat with Dek by candlelight. He had drawn a new image, a circle of mouths. In the center, not a coin, but a flame. He said, "We don't bury it anymore. We carry it and keep it warm, because forgetting is what wakes it." She nodded. and beneath her breathless chest, she felt it. A weight, a warmth, a whisper. Tell them.
Time does not forget. It folds, it buries, but it never lets go. Even when the coins are melted, even when the bowls are empty, even when the last scream becomes a whisper, and the last whisper becomes a story. Some debts are not meant to be paid. They are meant to be carried. Years passed. The village changed. Children grew tall. Huts became homes. Markets replaced the old graveyard. And the shrine, the one with the mouth-shaped bowl, became something of a landmark. Visitors came from distant places. They asked questions. They took pictures. They left offerings, coins, buttons, bones. The villagers never explained too much. They would simply say, "It's for the ones who didn't pass on. It's for the mouths that stayed open too long. It's for memory." Molly aged quietly. She never regained her voice, but she gained something else. Presence, the kind that makes even elders fall silent when she entered, the kind that made children instinctively bow their heads. She no longer lived in fear, only in rhythm, rising with the sun, lighting the same candle, tending the same bowl. She never asked the coin to return. She never touched another, but she knew, deep down, it was still close. It always had been. Deck grew strong, gentle, respected. He taught children how to carve wooden mouths. He showed them how to sit in silence and listen without needing to understand. He married, had a child, a daughter. She was born under a red moon, and on the night of her birth, she did not cry. She simply opened her mouth and exhaled a long, slow breath, as if something was leaving or entering. Molly held her, eyes wet with memory. She did not speak, could not, but her heart whispered what her lips could not. "I know you. I've heard you before. Welcome back." The villagers called the girl a blessing, a sign that the curse had lifted. But the oldest among them, the ones who had felt the hunger, who remembered the sound of wind inside their own mouths, knew better. They knew this was not a gift, it was a continuation, a whisper passed down like bone, like blood, like breath, a ritual that had become bloodline, not cursed, not haunted, but inherited. One day the child, barely 5, wandered to the shrine on her own. She placed her small hand on the bowl and whispered, "Is it your turn now?" The wind stirred, the trees rustled, and far beneath the earth something shifted, not rising, not hungry, just aware, listening. That night Molly sat by the window and looked up at the moon. It was full, pale, open-mouthed, and she knew this was not an ending. This was a ritual without a priest, a story without a final page. Because the coin had never been about metal, not really. It had always been about remembrance, about the small things we steal to survive, and the ghosts we create in doing so. Somewhere, deep in the forest, another child will one day die, and another coin will be placed beneath another tongue. And perhaps once more hunger will return, mouths will bleed, voices will vanish, but someone
Someone will remember this village, and they will know what to do. Not to fight it, not to fear it, but to sit with it, to open a bowl, to offer a name, to whisper, "We see you. We haven't forgotten. You can rest." Because the price never ends, but neither does love. And when we carry the debt of the dead, when we hold their hunger gently, with care, with reverence, we are not haunted, we are guarded. And the coin? It waits, not in a grave, not in a dream, but beneath the floorboards, in the silence between words, in the breath before bedtime, in the stories passed down with shaking hands and quiet eyes. It waits for forgetting, because that is what wakes it.